Okay, we're going to try to tie up our reproductive system videos, PowerPoint videos, with the male reproductive system. So again, just as I mentioned the female reproductive system, there will be some sensitive material discussed in this video. So again, use discretion in regards to where you play it and where you use it. Okay. Anyway, let's go ahead and start with all this. First of all, we talked about the gamete. Gamete, is the sex cell. And the sex cell in the female we talked was the ovum. And the sex cell in the male is called the spermatozoa. The spermatozoa is really small. It's a much smaller cell, like I mentioned, in the female reproductive system than the ovum. It's about a third of the size of a red blood cell. And a red blood cell is about from about 6 to 8 microns across. Okay, it's about 1/100th the size of a female ovum. It has a couple parts to it. First of all, the part that you see here, if you look at the picture in the top, it's the sort of like the pinkish area. That's called the head. Okay, and that has all the chromosomal material. We talked about how each of the gametes has 1/2 of each pair of the chromosomes from the mom and from the dad, and all that material is enclosed in the head of the spermatozoa. From behind the head, there's a long whip-like tail, and that's called a flagellum. And the reason why the flagellum's there is it actually acts like a tail. It'll move back and forth and will allow the spermatozoa to swim. You got to remember that what happens, the spermatozoa will be deposited in the vagina, and then all of a sudden they have to go up through that cervical os, up through the endocervical canal, up through the endometrial cavity and the intrauterine cavity, out the fallopian tube, and finally find the ovum, somewhere around there. They have a long way to go. Okay, has very little food, so it doesn't take a whole lot. So therefore, it only has a very short lifespan. Okay, it's estimated that for each ejaculation, there's about 300 million sperm per ejaculation, which is a whole lot. Okay, but it only takes one to fertilize the ovum. But again, you got to remember, it has to go a long way. Okay. Also, not all the spermatozoa that are produced for each ejaculation is viable. Okay, many of them don't swim. If they don't swim, they can't go anywhere. Some of them really don't move at all. The material in the spermatozoa might be not as good, and while males can produce spermatozoa for their entire lifetime, as they get older, the number decreases, the number of viable and reproductive spermatozoa decrease, so that all shrinks down the chances of pregnancy and to be able to get someone pregnant later on, simply because of the spermatozoa changes with time and with age. And let's just very quickly review the genitalia, because that's going to really help a little bit when it comes down to looking at and some of the discussion of the words we have. First thing we have to mention are the testes. Okay, and let's see if my pen is working today. No, my pen is not working today still. My screen is not working. It's a touch screen. It's not working anymore. Anyway, the testes are the male genitalia. Okay, and basically, or the male gonad, excuse me, part of the male genitalia, and there are two. Okay, they develop actually within the abdomen, just like the ovary does. And during gestation, what happens is that testes will actually, on each side, will migrate down through a canal in the lower abdominal wall and end up eventually in the scrotum. Okay, that's sort of important because for spermatozoa production, temperature has to be correct, and the scrotum will actually have muscles that will allow the testes to be risen or lowered depending upon to adjust the proper temperature for spermatozoa production. So the scrotum is very important in regards to the testes, and again, that's that skin-like sac that's between the thighs to be able to hold the testicles within that. Okay, and again, the scrotum is really important in regards to being able to move the testicles up and down to control the temperature for maximal spermatogenesis to be produced, spermatogenesis, production of sperm. Okay. The only other thing that we have on this slide that we should mention is the perineum. And if we look on this picture up in the upper right, you can actually see where the scrotum is, and you can see actually where the rectum and the anus is. The area of the tissue between the rectum and the anus and the back of the scrotum is called the perineum, just like it was between the female genitalia, external genitalia, and the anus in females. Okay, so basically that would be the area of the perineum. We have to talk a little bit more about that testicle. Okay, the testes. Basically what the testes do is they produce the spermatozoa. There are a number of tubules in there, and these tubules will actually generate a large volume of the spermatozoa. But when the spermatozoa are made, they go down these little tubules inside the testes, and they eventually collect in a little thing that's on the back and the superior side of the testicle, which is called the epididymis. Okay, so the seminiferous tubules are where the spermatozoa are made, but then what happens is all those spermatozoa eventually end up in the epididymis. Okay, and basically what the epididymis is a very long coil of a tubule. It's a long tubule, but it's very coiled. Okay, and what happens is the epididymis is sort of like the maturing grounds for the spermatozoa. They'll actually be deposited in the epididymis, and they'll sit there and they become more mature and they start to develop motility in there. What happens is that the lower portion of the epididymis, as you can see on the picture on the screen here, on the lower portion there's a tube that runs from the epididymis, the lower portion, upwards. Okay, and that's called the vas deferens. Now the vas deferens basically then comes from the lower portion of the epididymis, which is in the scrotum, which is on the back side of the testicle, and runs up through the scrotum and then goes through a hole or canal, the same canal that the testes came down in the lower portion of the abdomen. It's called the inguinal canal. And basically, when the spermatozoa get out in the epididymis, before ejaculation, what will actually have to happen is that the spermatozoa have to be projected up that vas deferens to get inside the abdominal cavity. They go actually over the top of the bladder, over the top side of the bladder, go behind the ureter. And you can actually see that in the picture there. And they meet with something in the back which are called the seminal vesicles. But the vas deferens is about 2 feet long to go from all the way from the inferior portion of the testicle, where the epididymis ends, all the way inside the abdomen, up over the top of the bladder, and to the back side of the bladder. Okay, so that's what that vas deferens is. And again, it carries the spermatozoa from the area of the epididymis finally to get to close to the area of the urethra where the ejaculation of the spermatozoa may occur. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. If I also look at the other organs of the reproductive system, male reproductive system, now if we look at the back side of the bladder, you can see how that epididymis in the picture in the upper right hand corner again starts at the epididymis, and that vas deferens comes up, goes over the top of the bladder, loops over the top of the ureter, which is that little tube you see on the posterior superior side of the bladder, and goes to the back of the bladder. And the back of the bladder are these things called seminal vesicles. Okay, so they're in the back and the inferior portion of the bladder, and basically what happens is these will collect the spermatozoa. What the seminal vesicles do is they actually add more fluid or more volume. Up to this point, the major product that we've had in the vas deferens are the spermatozoa. What happens is seminal vesicles will add more fluid to the mix, okay, and allows a larger volume. So when that is deposited during the course of ejaculation, it's a larger mix to be able to have that spermatozoa in. And what happens is when I start to take the fluids that are obtained in both the seminal vesicles to go along with the spermatozoa that are going up the vas deferens, this stuff is going to be called semen. Okay, so the semen actually is a combination of fluid that comes from the seminal vesicles, the spermatozoa at this point, but we'll also get additional fluid from what's called the bulbourethral gland, as well as the prostate, which I'll talk about in a minute. What happens is at the back of the bladder, then the seminal vesicles, because there's two, there's one on the back side on the right, one on the back side on the left. What happens, they come together in because there's two vas deferens, one from the left testicle, one from the right testicle, but they come together and they join in one duct, and the duct is called the ejaculatory duct. So now the fluid from the seminal vesicles plus the spermatozoa that have come all the way up to the vas deferens join again in one duct called the ejaculatory duct. And what that ejaculatory duct does is it burrows its way through another organ that sits on the bottom of the bladder, only in males, which is called the prostate gland. So it actually comes through the prostate gland and actually empties into the area of the urethra. Okay, and that's what the ejaculatory duct is. You can actually see it, how that comes in the picture on the upper right hand side, where you can see where the seminal vesicles on the posterior aspect of the bladder are now joined to where that ejaculatory duct goes through the prostate and joins in that area of the urethra within the area of the prostate. Okay, and this is what we're talking about. Again, this is just another image on the upper left hand side where you see the testicle, the epididymis in blue. You see the vas deferens looping over the top of the bladder, going to the back side of the bladder where it reaches the seminal vesicle. Seminal vesicle has that tubule. The seminal vesicles have that tubule or that ejaculatory duct that goes into the urethra in that sort of like a oval-shaped organ below the bladder called the prostate. I thought this was a sort of interesting little picture here that gives you an idea. Is thank you for visiting the bladder, and this is basically the spermatozoa going along into the backside of the bladder for entering into the seminal vesicle. Well, what happens is males have this other gland called the prostate gland, and the prostate gland sits right below the bladder. It's like a massive tissue right below the bladder. It's about the size of a large walnut, you know, not much bigger than that. Maybe a small peach or a apricot or something like that. It's not that large, and basically the urethra that comes in is draining the urine from the bladder goes directly down right through the middle of the prostate gland. You can actually see it in the picture on the upper right hand corner. Okay, so it's at the base of the bladder, and the urethra passes through the prostate, and within the prostate, that's where the ejaculatory duct that's just come from the seminal vesicles will enter into the urethra. Okay, well, the prostate does a couple things. Number one, it provides more fluid to add to the fluid from the seminal vesicles plus spermatozoa into the overall product of semen. Also, the prostate is supposed to have some antibacterial activity, some of the secretions, which is another reason why males seem to have less urinary tract infections than females. Females have a shorter urethra, males have a longer urethra. Males might get some antibacterial activity from the prostate, I don't know, stuff like that. And so as a result, all those things seem to, and also the reproductive tract in the male is continuous with the urinary tract, where in the female they're two separate tracts. Okay. Also, the prostate has some smooth muscle in it, so at the time of ejaculation, that prostate will actually rhythmically contract, squeeze, 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 to provide some propulsive power to the semen as it's going to be ejected out through the end of the penis. Okay, so that's the prostate. The problems that happens with the prostate is as guys get older, a couple things happen that are significant. Testosterone starts to change. For some reason, a reductase enzyme that's produced or that's made or that starts to become active changes testosterone to something called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. And the dihydrotestosterone is still a very strong testosterone, but has two other effects besides being a strong testosterone. Number one, male pattern baldness. So a lot of times men will start to lose their hair up on the top and leave that little rim, and that has something to do with the dihydrotestosterone. That's the first thing. The second thing that the dihydrotestosterone does, it binds to cells on the prostate and makes the prostate bigger. So as guys get older, the prostate starts to get larger and larger and larger, and what it does, it starts to squeeze the urethra, because that urethra goes right down through the center of it, and that becomes a problem. That's why a lot of times older males will have a little bit more difficult time passing the urine, because the urethra is being squeezed by the prostate as the urethra goes through the prostate. Okay, and sometimes they have to go and actually scrape that out from inside. So anyway, that's the prostate gland. Cowper's gland are also some small glands, and you can see it looks like a little pea that's just underneath the area of the prostate. Okay, and it's inferior to the prostate. It also secretes a fluid into the urethra that adds to the semen. Okay, and that's called the Cowper gland or bulbourethral gland, which is just below the area of the prostate. And those are the organs we pretty much talk about. And this is again looking at the same thing. We have the penis, we have the scrotum with the testicle, with the epididymis on the posterior and superior side, with the vas deferens that goes over the top of the bladder to the back side of the bladder to the seminal vesicles, the ejaculatory duct going through the prostate to meet the urethra, and then just below the prostate we have that bulbourethral gland that also puts a fluid into the area of the urethra, and then out through the area of the penis to the end of the penis. Okay, and that's the whole thing. The penis is basically the conduit for the urethra. It has erectile tissue, and the erectile tissue in the penis is basically what are called venous sinuses. What happens is inside the penis, there are large areas that collect a lot of venous blood. So during the time of erection, what will actually happen is those venous sinuses fill with blood, and as a result, that's the process that makes a penis erect during an erection. It was interesting that years ago there used to be a cardiac medication, okay, and what they did was when people were taking this particular cardiac medication for high blood pressure and for heart-related problems, what they found was that they started to grow more hair. You know, in other words, the areas that they were a little thin in hair, the hair would grow. So the pharmaceutical company says, hey, you know what? Hey, we got a gold mine here. We could actually, if people are interested in their hair loss, maybe what will happen is maybe we could take this medication and convert it and make it into something, put it under a different name, and actually use it as a hair growth medicine. Well, guess what they did? They did. And so what happened was something else sort of like happened after that. And what actually happened after that, they realized that when they created this new concoction of this medication, which came from a blood pressure heart medication, that not only they grow hair, what happens is their erections lasted longer. Okay, and as a result, they said, heck with the hair. What we're going to do is we're going to make a medication that now will prolong an erection. And they did this, and hence the onset of Viagra. And that was where Viagra actually came from an old cardiac medication a number of years ago that changed. Okay. Anyway, so that's the penis. The end of it is called the glans penis, which is a much softer, more sensitive distal tip of the penis, and that's just usually covered over by the foreskin, which can be pulled back. That prepuce which is the foreskin, which covers the glans penis, in many cases can be removed by what we call circumcision. They just go and usually, you know, just after birth, before the kid knows what's going on, they cut off the foreskin, leave it off, they just wrap it and stuff like that. Have you ever seen a circumcision? It could be a little brutal, but the kid doesn't remember. I've never met anybody that remembers circumcision from when they were a baby. You know, you don't really start having memories until you're probably about 3 or something like that. Well, one of the things with all this male reproductive system, one thing that we talk about is impotence. Okay, now there are a couple things in regards to impotence. Again, erectile dysfunction is something that we talk about. That's the importance of an erection is to be able for a penile insertion. So as a result, erectile dysfunction becomes a problem, as well as the testes have to make enough spermatozoa that they have a good chance of reaching an ovum if they want to be able to produce pregnancy. Okay, so impotence has to do with this erectile dysfunction. ED, they always talk about that. You see all the commercials for ED and stuff like that. And again, that Viagra, which basically increases the blood flow to the penis. It causes the veins to dilate and fill with blood in the penis, which actually causes that erection. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later on. Let's get to some combining forms, okay? And these are pretty simple. You can tell that most of the people who write the medical terminology textbooks are females, because they have a lot of volume on female stuff and only a couple of pages on males. So they forget about us, but that's okay, because there is really a lot more to know about the female reproductive system. The first combining form is andro. Andro means male. Okay, androgens are male hormones. Okay, so you take an androgenic hormone, that's a male type of a hormone. So andro means male. In fact, if you see some type of the hormonal supplementations for male, you know, andro 500 and stuff like that, and that's where the andro comes from. Andro means male. Belano means penis. They talked about the area of the glans penis at the end is basically what we're talking about, but belano actually means penis. Cryo means cold, and I really don't know why that would be in here, but it is in some medical terminology texts about cold. I don't know what it has to do with it. Crypto is interesting, though. There is a good reason why crypto is in the male reproductive system. Crypto means hidden. A cryptologist is someone who looks for hidden words. You know, a crypt is something that will hide a body or something like that. And what happens is crypto here stands for sometimes one of the testicles doesn't descend and doesn't go where it's supposed to be. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And if I jump down a couple word roots, one of the word roots in combining forms for testicle or testes is orco, orchio, or orchido. Don't ask me why that is, but it is like it is. But what happens is they call it a cryptorchidism or cryptorchism. And basically that's when the testicle doesn't come down and eventually at the time of birth deposits that testicle in the scrotum, because again it starts from the abdomen and works down this canal, and sometimes it just stops somewhere in that root between where it starts to develop and the scrotum. And that's called cryptorchidism, that undescended or hidden testicle. It's sort of somewhere up that canal. You can't always tell where it is. They have to go and find it, but somewhere up that canal. And usually when the male child gets a little older, what they'll do is they'll actually surgically go in. If it hasn't descended, they'll usually go in and find it, pull it down, and sew it to the inside of the scrotum, which is called an orchiopexy. PEXI, surgical fixation, orchio, surgical fixation of the testicle. Epididymal means epididymis, we talked about, and that's the place where the spermatozoa on the posterior and superior side of the back side of the testicle will mature and sort of get ready. Okay, gono means gonad, which means the male, which would be in male the testes. Hydro means water. I'll mention this in a little bit when I talk about conditions. There's something called a hydrocele, and sometimes what happens as that testicle works its way down that canal, which is called the inguinal canal, since it's from inside the abdomen, remember what was inside that abdomen? Our good old friend the peritoneum, that membrane. That peritoneum is wrapped around it and comes down with that testicle down into the area of the scrotum. When it gets in the scrotum, that peritoneal tube shuts off. And it surrounds itself around the cord, which is the vas deferens and artery, vein, and stuff like that around the outside. But sometimes that, and usually the part of the peritoneum inside the inside the scrotum around the testicle will degenerate, but sometimes it doesn't. And what happens is sometimes that area of the peritoneum will generate a fluid. That fluid builds up around the testicle. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's called a hydrocele. I'll talk about that later on. Orco, orchio, or orchido all mean testy or testicle. So anyway, I'm not sure where that came from, but that's what that is. Prostato obviously means prostate. And that prostate is that organ that only male have on the bottom side of the bladder organ. The urethra goes right through the middle of it. Okay, and that's the prostate. Sem, that's S-E-M-I-N-I. Semini means seed. Where basically semen is basically the spermatozoa plus other fluids, so it's like the seed inside that. Spermo or spermato obviously means spermatozoa, or the male gamete. Terato means monster, and again, this is always in the male reproductive system, but terato means monster. Sometimes things are what are called teratogenic, and teratogenic means that whether there's some type of a developmental abnormality, a chromosomal problem, but what happens is the offspring has a problem. Okay, it's not physically formed. There might be certain significant abnormalities or irregularities, and it's sort of, hard to say monster, but that's what they say, teratogenic. So terato means monster. Testo means testes, obviously. Varico means varicose. Sometimes what happens is that cord that comes down with the vas deferens, artery and vein and nerve that come down with the testicle that go down the scrotum. What happens is sometimes those veins become like varicose veins in the legs, and what they do is they get big and wormy, and it's called a varicocele. It's never a problem. Nobody really worries about it. It feels like a bag of worms in the area of the scrotum. So other than the feel, it really doesn't have a whole lot of effect to do one thing. So varico means varicose. Vaso means vessel, and that's the vas deferens, because the vas deferens, vas is a tube or a vessel. Zoo means animal. So not only are males monsters, but they're also animals, I guess. I don't know. But zoo means animal, like in a zoo. What do you see in a zoo? Animals. So that's what that's all about. Let's get some suffixes here. Genesis. Genesis means formation. That's an old one we've had. Spermatogenesis would be the formation of spermatozoa. Okay. O-N-E at the end. We talked about A-S-E frequently means an enzyme, or usually means an enzyme. Sometimes if you see a word that ends in O-N-E, testosterone, it means a hormone. Females, the estrogen is actually estrone. So O-N-E means hormone. Progesterone. Okay, ends in O-N-E. So O-N-E at the end of a word frequently means, or usually means, some type of a hormone. PEXI. PEXI means a surgical fixation. Again, when they have that undescended testicle, that cryptorchidism, they pull it down and they sew it to the inside of the scrotum, which is called an orchio testicle. PEXI, surgical fixation. Okay. Stomy is creating a surgical opening to something. So I'm not sure why that's also in there, but these are some suffixes that we might have. Let's talk about some vocabulary, most of which we've already covered, so I don't have to tell them again. I go over them again. And that first one again up there is that bulbourethral gland, okay? And my touch screen, for some reason, is no longer functional. I've been hitting it so much over the past couple weeks with the PowerPoint videos that my computer touch screen is gone. Anyway, if you look underneath the area of the prostate, there's like a little bag that sits underneath. It looks like a little bag, and that's the bulbourethral gland. You can see it right there. It's also called Cowper gland, okay? It sits underneath there, and it sits just below below the prostate. It has a small tube that leads into the urethra, and it also deposits more fluid into the urethra to add to the volume for an ejaculation with that semen. Ejaculation is just the medical word for the ejection of the semen through the end of the penis. Okay, and again, what assists that ejaculation is, first of all, the volume of the semen from the spermatozoa from the testes, as well as the fluids from the seminal vesicles, the prostate, and the bulbourethral gland, as well as the contractions from the prostate that are able to force that semen out through the end of the penis. Ejaculatory duct, we've mentioned that before. If you look up on the picture, you see the seminal vesicles, and you see the seminal vesicles come together with one duct that goes into the area of the urethra through the prostate, and that's called the ejaculatory duct. Okay, the epididymis we've already talked about, and you can see the epididymis here on this image, and that's the area on the posterior and superior pole of the testicle where the spermatozoa will mature. Okay, erectile dysfunction, we talked about that before. In a situation where, if you look at the image here, the blue area is not really blue, but that's actually meant to be those venous sinuses. Okay, and that's the erectile tissue. Again, there's lots of gaps inside there, and as a result, when they fill with venous blood, that's what causes an erection to occur. And for some reason, whether it be neurological, whether it be psychological, or whatever the case may be, nothing doesn't happen. So as a result, erectile dysfunction would be either the inability to obtain erection or inability to sustain erection for sufficient time to allow intercourse to occur. So that would be called erectile dysfunction. Flagellum, we talked about the flagellum before, and if you look at the lower picture, you see it says one egg, one sperm. You see that little sperm with that long little tail, that little hair-like whip-like thing at the back? That's the flagellum, and the flagellum has a little muscle to it, and what happens is the muscle allows the flagellum to move back and forth, and it allows the spermatozoa to swim. If you actually look at, if you take fresh semen and you put it on a slide and you look at it underneath the microscope, you'll actually see the spermatozoa swimming all over. And actually, for when they do a sperm count, the sperm count's one thing, but they also to see what's the approximate number of the spermatozoa that are actually moving. Because again, if they're not moving, they're not going to go anywhere. They just sit there and do nothing. They're all lazy. Okay. So anyway, that's that. I'm going to skip fraternal twins until I get down to identical twins. And glans penis is basically the end of the penis, where the head of the penis would be at the distal end. Okay. I just want to mention something about fraternal and identical twins. And what happens is identical twins are identical because it's not that they just look like each other, but they have the same DNA. And the reason why they have the same DNA is because what happened was there was one egg and one sperm, and they met together and they fertilized. And that made a zygote. We talked about that before. That zygote comes down the fallopian tube, implants itself in the wall of the uterus, okay? And it's getting more, and the cells are multiplying. They're getting more and more cells. And for some reason, those cells will divide. In other words, instead of having one ball of cell, now that ball of cell divides, and I have two balls of cells. I have one over here, one over here. They came from the same ovum, they came from the same sperm. As a result, they have the same identical DNA material, and they're called identical twins because they're identical. In the case of fraternal twins, it's different. In fraternal twins, I have an ovum here, an ovum here, I have a sperm here, and a sperm here. I have two fertilizations, and two fertilizations occur, and because their DNA material is a random mix. In other words, you can have if you have an identical twin, it can only be a brother and brother or a sister and sister. You can't have a brother and sister as an identical twin. Why? Because their DNA material is the same. That 23rd chromosome is either XX female or XY male, so therefore it can't be different. But on the other hand, if I have fraternal twins, because it's a random mixing of two separate sperm and two separate eggs or ovum, then what happens is the DNA could be very random. They could look alike because they're from the same parents. That's not a problem. But what we also find is we could have a male and a female, and their DNA material is not the same. It could be there'll be a lot of things that are the same, okay, but a lot of things that aren't, okay. And so as a result, they're called fraternal because they're bound together in the same uterus, but that's about it, okay. And it's probably the same birthday, unless it's one at 11:59, the other one at 12:02 or something like that. I don't know. But basically, that's what we see with the difference between fraternal and identical twins. Impotence. Impotence is a situation where, again, there's a lot of things that would cause someone to be impotent. And one of the things would be that they just don't produce enough spermatozoa to be able to produce a pregnancy. Okay, it takes two things. It takes the spermatozoa. It takes also the insertion. So as a result, if those things are wrong, they really are not potent, which they get the word impotence. Perineum is what we talked about before. That's the area, if you look at this picture, if you go from the posterior aspect of the scrotum back to the anus, that's the perineum. We talked about the prostate gland before, only in males, not in females, and that gland is sitting there right below the bladder. It's like a donut where the urethra goes right through the middle of it. It gets larger as guys get older. The scrotum we know is that cloth sac that will contain the testes. Again, and if you actually, I'm not saying, if you looked at the scrotum, there'll be little wrinkles on the side, and those little wrinkles are because inside that skin, attached to the skin, is a small little sheet of muscles, which is called the cremaster muscles. And the cremaster muscles, again, will contract if they want to bring the testicles up closer, if it's too cold, to be able to keep the testicles warm, or if it's too warm, they'll actually drop them to decrease and let them air out a little bit. So anyway, that's what the scrotum does. Semen, we know, is that combination of all that material. It's the combination of the spermatozoa, the fluid from the seminal vesicles, the fluid from the bulbourethral gland, and the fluid from the prostate, all mixed together in one large mass, and that's called semen. And that seminal vesicle, we know, is on the back side of the bladder, like we've talked about a couple times already, where the vas deferens, as it loops over the top of the bladder, goes into the seminal vesicles. Seminal vesicles provide some fluid, and it then joins the two seminal vesicles, one on the right, one on the left, joined together with the ejaculatory duct that goes into the area of the urethra to be able to deposit what its contribution to the semen for ejaculation. Okay, and that covers that vocabulary. If I look at this over here, seminiferous tubules. On the picture on the top, what we have is we have a testicle, and you can see what are called the seminiferous tubules. And throughout the whole body of the testicle will be all these little tubules. And it's sort of like an assembly line for the production of spermatozoa. They're made along these tubules, and they're called the seminiferous tubules. Spermatozoa, we know, is the male gamete. It's the male sex cell. Sterilization. Sterilization is the process by which you decrease the ability to produce or deliver spermatozoa. Probably the ultimate sterilization would be orchiectomy. Orchio, testes, ectomy, removal. By removing or castration would be the same thing, castration, orchiectomy. By removing the testicles, the factories that make the spermatozoa are no longer there. So as a result, that results in sterilization. Also, they've always talked about some chemical sterilization or certain medications that will actually decrease the ability of the testicle to actually produce spermatozoa, probably not nearly as effective as a surgical sterilization with castration, orchiectomies. Okay, if you ever heard of the word eunuch, eunuch is basically would be a male that where the testicles were removed for one purpose or another. Okay, and that would be called a eunuch. Stroma is just the tissue of the testes. I don't think I'd worry about that. Testes, we know what they are already. Place where we make the spermatozoa. Testosterone is a male hormone. Again, that male hormone testosterone is present in both males and females. Females will have a little bit, but males, the concentration is much greater than in females. And females have more estrogen, but also males have a little bit of estrogen. And that estrogen and testosterone balance, I mean, you know, like I mentioned in the female reproductive system, males who have an extra amount of testosterone that they use like supplemental, you know, like when they have testosterone supplements that they're taking later in life, what happens is sometimes there's a gene that gets turned on, okay, and it makes an enzyme called aromatase, and this aromatase converts the testosterone to estrogen, and that was what causes the development of enlargement of the breast or gynecomastia in males when they get larger, okay, and that's because of the convertibility between testosterone and estrogen, okay. Vas deferens, we know, is that tube that takes the spermatozoa from the area of the testes all the way to the back of the bladder where it meets with the seminal vesicles. When they do a vasectomy, what they do is they go down to the top of the scrotum, find the area where the vas deferens is, make a little small cut in the area of the top of the scrotum, pull out the vas deferens, strip it off of all the tissues, tie or snip it, or actually clamp it, cut in the middle and tie it off, or put a clip on it, and basically now the spermatozoa are still produced in the testicles. The testicle still producing is the source of the production of testosterone. So they're still making testosterone, they're still making spermatozoa, but I can't get spermatozoa past where the vas deferens was cut, and that's called a vasectomy. I'll talk about that later. Okay, a couple of pathological conditions, and we'll tie this up in a few minutes. First is testicular carcinoma. Okay, testicular carcinoma can be lethal. But what happens is we find success rates in males who have had testicular carcinoma to be not that bad. And the reason why is because males, where females should be doing self-breast exams, I should have mentioned that in the female reproductive system, where females should be doing on a monthly or every other month self-breast exams, identifying new lesions or new masses, males should also be doing the same thing with the testicles. So if there's a guy in the class, maybe they should do that. Okay, just every month or every other month, just palpate the testicles. If you feel a little nodule or a little knot, it's something I definitely let the doc know and want to look at in regards to possibly being a cancer. They're I can't say highly treatable. It depends upon how involved they are. Scott Hamilton, the skater, Lance Armstrong had testicular carcinoma. So there's a number of people who have had testicular carcinoma that survived it simply because they were able to find it. Cryptorganism, like I mentioned before, is where that's undescended testicle. Now, if I look at the picture, in the upper portion, where it's upper left, it shows that on the one side of the image with the scrotum, there's a testicle down in normal position. It says normal. What happens is that other testicle on the other side could be anywhere along that canal, which is through the abdominal wall and into the abdominal cavity. Okay, and that's called a cryptorganism. And again, down the road, if it doesn't descend, they'll go up there, they'll explore the canal, find it, pull it down, and sew it to the inside of the scrotum, because I have to be able to control the temperature for spermatozoa production. Okay. The next word I have in a pathological condition is hydrocele. Now, if I look at the upper right picture, that sort of suggests that hydrocele. You see the testicle sitting inside the scrotum, and usually there's not much in there. It's just the testicle, the scrotum, and then the muscles that will control the scrotum moving up and down and stuff like that. But on the right side of that upper right picture, you can see there's a large area between, and that's where a lot of fluid is collected in there. And basically that fluid is fluid that's been secreted by that peritoneum that follow the testicle down into the area of the scrotum. It gets large. Surgical procedure is a simple surgical procedure. They go in, they make a small cut in the area of the scrotum, they take out that sac, they tie the sac off, evacuate all the fluid, and nothing is left. Nothing's a problem. Okay, it's a piece of cake. The testicle's still there. It doesn't damage anything like that. It doesn't affect sterility, unless, of course, the hydrocele has been there for a long time that caused so much pressure on the testicle that the testicle becomes more and more degenerated. Okay, they're really commonly associated with if a male at a younger age had a hernia, an inguinal hernia. It's not unusual to see a hydrocele occur in those individuals as well. Okay, I've seen some of these. They might be the size of a baseball or a softball. They could be actually quite large. And what happens is, one of the way that you could tell it's a hydrocele, besides the feel, because it's very tense, like a bag of like a water balloon. If you take a flashlight and you shine it to the back side of the scrotum, the light will come through because it's coming through the water. Okay, so it means it's sort of like it's all fluid in there. Testicular torsion is a situation where the testicle, besides what leaves the testicle going superiorly, what comes down to the testicle, okay, is what's called the spermatic cord. And inside that spermatic cord, through that canal in the lower abdominal wall, is not just the vas deferens, which is going upwards, and veins, which are going upward, but arteries that come down, because again, the testicle still needs a blood supply just like everything else. What happens sometimes, this happens usually in younger males, for some reason that cord twists, which is that torsion. So they get a twist of the testicle. It twists around. It's a significant and it's a surgical emergency. Causes intense, extreme, excruciating scrotal pain. Okay, and if you know of a male who's developing for no reason at all extreme scrotal pain, probably have him checked out right away. Because what happens is if I take that cord and twist it, it takes the artery that's going down, the testicular artery that's going down the testicle, and twists it, which decreases and closes up the lumen, so I can't get blood down the testicle. And if something does get blood, what happens to it? it dies. So as a result, that becomes a problem. Okay, a varicocele is the picture on the lower left. Okay, and what happens is, again, in that spermatic cord, not only is there the vas deferens, there's also nerve and an artery, but there's a vein. And sometimes the veins in that spermatic cord get filled up and dilated just like the varicose veins in the legs, and that's called a varicocele. It really doesn't have much of a significance of anything. It's like feels like a bag of worms in there, but on the other hand, in regards to potency, it really doesn't make a difference one way or the other. Okay, so it doesn't hurt it at all. Okay, and that's called a varicocele. They usually don't do much for it. They just say, hey, if it doesn't bother you, don't do anything about it. It's perfectly fine. Let's talk about the prostate gland. There's two things in the prostate we should know about. Let's go to the first one on the bottom, the prostatic hyperplasia. In the prostatic hyperplasia, hyper excessive plasia formation. Again, I mentioned that as males get older, the testosterone changes from testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, and one of the bad effects of that, it makes the prostate bigger. As it makes the prostate bigger, it squeezes the urethra. Now, if I look at the lower right picture, on the picture on the left side of the lower right picture, the urethra is open. Okay, you can see where the urine would be coming out through the urethra, and the urethra is open. But if I look at the right picture on the lower right image, what happens? You can see how the urethra is narrowed. What that does is it causes a lot of urine to be, first of all, it's a difficult sometimes initiating a urinary stream. The stream becomes more trickly as compared to a nice forceful stream. And usually what happens is males with a large prostate feel like they have to go to the bathroom all the time. And that's logical, because what happens is they don't fully empty their bladder. Because what happens, they dribble for a while and they get the urine out in small quantities. It stops, but they still have a lot of urine in the bladder. So when finally the urine gets a little bit more stretched out because they get a little bit more urine, you feel like you have to go and go and go again. There used to be a commercial on TV where they had a guy that had to go to the bathroom all the time. Baseball game, had to go by everybody in the row. He basically, then they had a pickup truck with the outhouse on the back of it that he'd get out and go in the outhouse. But and that's what happens because the prostate gets large. What they frequently have to do is go in what's called first of all, that prostatic hyperplasia is called BPH, benign B prostate hyperplasia, okay, which means excessive formation. And what they frequently do for that is what's called a TURP. TURP stands for transurethral resection of the prostate. What they do is they take a tube, stick it up through the area of the urethra, and when they get to the prostate, they core it out. They scrape it out from the inside. Okay, so they go in and scrape out the prostate from the inside, and then they put like a stent, which is basically a catheter, up there, and let the tissue form around that stent. Okay, they leave that catheter in there for a while, and when that stent is formed, they're able to pull the catheter out, and now there's a new tube that's a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's that. And I should say, and let me say something about prostate cancer. Cancer of the prostate. That's getting late. Carcinoma of the prostate. It's exceptionally common. Exceptionally common. They say that if you have a male that gets to be 90 years of age, guess what? He's going to show some cancer of the prostate, just because of the wear and tear on the prostate or as an organ. The good news about cancer of the prostate, in most cases, it's relatively slow growing. It takes a long time to go from early stages to a late stage. Some of the rule of thumb in many places is if you have a less than 10-year life expectancy, if they're expected to live less than 10 years of age, let's say if you're older, then what happens if they decide you have prostatic cancer, they say, hey, probably have a good life. Enjoy yourself. We're not going to do anything special, and let it go. However, if somebody's much younger, where they have a long time to live, then what they do is they'll go in and do a prostatectomy. The prostatectomy does cause a problem a little bit, and the reason why it does is because to do that, it's a really bloody procedure, and they have to cut a lot around the base of the bladder, which means there's a lot of nerves that are there. Sometimes it results in some erectile dysfunction, incontinence. Incontinence is a medical word for dribbling. In other words, you can't hold the urine as well. Okay, so it results in some problems. So they'd probably prefer not to do it. They can also do it in a couple other ways. Sometimes what they find, if it's a very isolated cancer inside there, what they do is if they think there's a cancer, well, first of all, how do they know that there's a cancer of the prostate? Okay, obviously guys would have difficult time passing their urine, like the benign prostatic hyperplasia, like we talked about. But there's a couple things they could do. Probably the single most common thing that they do to evaluate the prostate is digital rectal exam. The doctor will be able to take with a gloved finger and go inside, and actually you could feel the prostate in the area of the rectum. And you could feel the prostate for size, and as well if you feel a lump or a nodule, chances are that's going to be a cancer. If that's the case, they do what's called a TRUS. TRUS stands for transrectal ultrasound. They'll take an ultrasound probe and put it up in the area of the rectum, and when they do that, they could take an ultrasonic picture of the prostate. Then they could know exactly where they could go in and do needle biopsies. They could go in with a needle and take little biopsies of little areas to look at the cells to see if they're cancer. Okay. Another thing that they used to do a lot more, they still do, but it's been sort of downplayed a little bit, is something called a PSA. PSA stands for prostate specific antigen. Prostate specific antigen. And what happens is the only place that makes this prostate specific antigen is of course, the prostate. And what they find is that if a male has a cancer of the prostate, this PSA level in the blood, it's a blood test, this PSA level in the blood will go up. Okay. Now, also enlargement of the prostate may cause it to go up. Usually doesn't elevate quite as high as cancer of the prostate. Cancer of the prostate may go exceptionally high. In fact, a lot of times what happens is after a man has a cancer of the prostate and they do a prostatectomy, frequently they will follow him afterwards for a long period of time with PSAs, because if the PSA, if they take the prostate out, the PSA should be essentially zero. However, if the PSA after a prostatectomy starts to rise, it means that there's prostate tissue either left or somewhere else, i.e. metastasis, and they have to start to worry about that a little bit more. So that's what we talk about, a carcinoma of the prostate as well as prostatic hyperplasia. A couple other things that we should talk about here. Number one, talk about a couple things in the penis. Hypospadias. Hypospadias is a situation where the urethra exits at the very end of the glans penis. Okay, hypospadias, it doesn't. It empties on the bottom surface somewhere. It could be anywhere from where the penis starts, where it meets the scrotum, all the way out to just before the end of the glans penis. Okay, it's not. I can't say it's common, but I can't say it's tremendously rare. It does occur. So they'll find this in a younger male. They can actually do surgical correction to elongate the tube, so as a result it'll come out at the very end. It does create some hygiene problems, as well as sometimes it might be associated with other abnormalities, genital urinary abnormalities, because it's not supposed to be that way. Also, sometimes it might result in some intersex related problems. In other words, if the penis is very small and the urethra comes out on the bottom side of the penis, it's much more similar to the clitoral tissue and where the urethra is, that's just behind the area of the clitoris in females. So it might be a little bit of a problem. Phimosis. Phimosis is only occurring in males with a foreskin. Males with circumcision, you don't have to worry about this. What happens is, in males that still are uncircumcised, the area underneath the foreskin develops a lot of dead tissue. Okay, dead cells and gooey material that's underneath there is called smegma that develops underneath there. And so males have to be taught to pull the foreskin back and clean. If they're not very judicious in doing that on a regular basis, that foreskin as they get older gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And what happens is then they can't retract it. Okay, in other words, they can't get underneath because the foreskin gets really tight. Or what happens is sometimes they are able to get it behind the area of the head of the penis, because the head of the penis, the glans penis, is a little bit larger than the rest of the shaft of the penis. It gets behind there and gets stuck. It can't go back. Then it's like taking rubber bands and putting rubber bands around the penis that squeezes off the glans penis, which is a problem. So basically they have to sometimes result in doing a circumcision later in life, which is not nearly as pleasant as early in life. You don't remember in early life. Early in life, basically when they do a circumcision, they take the baby, usually the day after birth or something like that, or even sometimes the day of, put them on a little what's called a papoose board, strap their arms and legs down, and the doc sort of frees up the foreskin, takes a little bell, puts it over the top of the glans penis, takes this little bell, has a little knife in it, goes zip, and pulls it off, and it's done. Wrap it up, the baby's screaming, and we're done. Okay. A couple things also to finish up in here: sexually transmitted diseases. Chlamydia. Chlamydia is a really common sexually transmitted disease. It's probably as common as gonorrhea. In males, it could be in both males and females, but in males it creates what's called a non-specific urethritis. What happens, they have a urethral discharge, but the urethral discharge is only mildly uncomfortable, and it's sort of like a milky white with sometimes little clumps in it. Okay, it's not really all that tremendously pussy looking, but again, it's a bacteria, and that bacteria can be spread through sexual contact to other individuals. So it is of concern. It's easily treated with antibiotics and it's taken care of. Okay, tetracycline, erythromycin, vancomycin and stuff like that will take care of the chlamydial infection. But again, it can be transmitted, so there has to be considered a sexually transmitted disease. Gonorrhea is also a sexually transmitted disease, as everybody knows. And what happens is gonorrhea is a bacteria. It's called a gram-negative intracellular diplococcus. If you look at it, it stains red. They usually come in pairs. And again, in the male, what happens, it causes a rip roaring urethritis. Okay, and it causes a lot of pus that will form in the area of the urethra, and therefore they usually have more of a significant amount of discharge, which is usually a purulent or pussy looking yellowish, as well as thick and painful. Okay, this can be treated as well, you know, with antibiotics. With penicillin could still be used to treat gonorrhea, or other antibiotics can also be used now to treat gonorrhea. But again, gonorrhea can be sexually transmitted, so it can be given to females. And then we talked earlier in the female conditions about cervicitis, where the picture showed the pus coming out of the area of the cervical os, and if it gets up in the fallopian tubes, it gets out to the outside into the peritoneal cavity, which is what we call that pelvic inflammatory disease. So that's gonorrhea. Okay, herpes genitalis is basically a herpes simplex virus, herpes simplex type 2. Okay, herpes simplex type 1 is the one that causes the cold sores on the mouth. Not a big deal. Okay, herpes simplex type 2 is the one that causes genital herpes, ulcers and certain types of lesions that will occur in the area of the penis, which again can be transmitted to both people. The bad part about viruses is you can't kill a virus. Viruses are never alive in the first place. They're pieces of DNA or RNA. In this case, you know, they're pieces of DNA or RNA. They're inside a capsule, and what happens is once that capsule gets inside the body, the capsule is released, the DNA or RNA is released and put into the cytoplasm of the cell, and it gets incorporated in our nucleus in our own DNA. And what it does, what the DNA does, is it creates a factory for making more viral particles. So the virus gets multiplied, just like what we're talking about with the COVID-19 flu and stuff like that. That virus gets in our own DNA and starts to make more viral particles. Okay, and that's what the herpes simplex virus does. Okay, again, so you can't cure it. It's going to come back and back and back. You can sort of control it a little bit when it does come on by certain antiviral agents, acyclovir, valcyclovir, and stuff like that. They may decrease the time that it's out, but besides that, you can't kill it. So once you have it, it's there for life. Okay, syphilis. Syphilis is another disease. It's caused by a little bug called Treponema pallidum, which looks like a little corkscrew. Okay, and what happens is it's sneaky. Okay, and it's sneaky because what the Treponema pallidum does, it's again spread by sexual contact, and what it does, it creates what's a lesion on the penis called a chancre. And a chancre looks like a sore. Okay, but the sore is not really all that painful. And again, people say it's not that painful, I don't have to worry about it much. And guess what happens to that chancre? It goes away. But that Treponema pallidum stays in the body, and the Treponema pallidum, that bug, could go a lot of places. It goes to the brain, it goes to the liver, it goes to the cardiovascular system, it goes multiple places, and causes infections in multiple places. And it also is sexually transmitted. Okay, so that's the problem with that. It's also treated as well by antibiotics. Okay, and I'll talk to you when we talk about tests in a minute as to some of the things that can be done. Okay, so that's syphilis. A couple lab tests. We talked about the PSA before, that prostate-specific antigen, and that was a test that was frequently, commonly used for determining if someone had carcinoma or cancer of the prostate. Again, it can be misleading because it can still be elevated in a big prostate, benign prostatic hyperplasia, but much higher in cancer of the prostate, prostatic carcinoma. But that's a test that's still commonly done. I know that when I go to my primary care doc, about every other year he gets a PSA on me. Semen analysis. Semen analysis is a situation where if there's a problem with a family unable to obtain a pregnancy, they'll look at the male in regards to the volume of the semen. In other words, we have not just the spermatozoa, but also the volume. They'll look at how many spermatozoa are there, what the count is, that sperm count. They'll also look at things such as are the sperm moving? Do they look normal? Do they have two heads? You know, all kinds of stuff like that. So they'll analyze the semen to see if the semen is adequate enough to be be able to have a likely chance that it may produce a pregnancy. Okay, castration. Castration, again, like you said before, is basically the process of removing the testicles. If you remove the testicles, there's no factory for making the spermatozoa. The problem with the castration is that when that happens, it also decreases the testosterone, because again, there's a little bit of testosterone that I think could be made in the adrenal glands, but the majority of the testosterone we have is coming out of the testicles. So therefore, you take the testicle out, guess what? Testosterone's down, which causes all kinds of other problems. Okay, more feminization of the body and things like that. Circumcision, again, that's that process of removing the foreskin. Digital rectal exam, I talked about that before. Probably one of the best ways and easiest ways for the doc to be able to evaluate the prostate is feel it. Stick your finger in the rectum, feel around, feel the area of the prostate. You can actually feel it. Two little humps you'll actually feel in there. It's funny because at the school I do have in the back in one of the cabinets, I do have some prostate models. You can actually feel what the prostate feels like, the size and the texture of it. But that's what it is, and they can feel for lumps and stuff like that. Photoselective vaporization of the prostate. What happens is, again, if they have a lesion, a cancer in the lesion, and it's well localized to one spot, they can sometimes take and vaporize it by light, like a laser. So as a result, they could zap it out, and that's called photoselective vaporization of the prostate. Transurethral resection of the prostate, we talked about that before. When the prostate is big, they go up to the area of the urethra and core it out from the inside. Squeeze it out from the inside, make the opening of the urethra bigger, put a catheter in there to create a stent, and then later on remove that catheter. Vasectomy, I talked about that before. If I take it and prevent the spermatozoa from getting to the back side of the bladder, that what happens is there's no way to be able to get spermatozoa out through the end of the urethra with an ejaculation. So as a result, what happens is they find the spermatic cord, okay, in the area of the scrotum. They feel inside, and they find the area of the vas deferens, which feels like a wire, like a piece of wire with like insulation on it. They make a little cut right over there. They numb it up. They make a little cut, pull the vas deferens out, clamp it in one spot, clamp it in another, cut in the middle, and then tie it or clip it. And as a result, now I've lost the continuity of that tube, and therefore pregnancy you can't deliver the spermatozoa. Let's talk about some abbreviations here. Whoops, I should have gone back. Anyway, BPH was the first one. I wouldn't worry about too many of the abbreviations. Most of them I already talked about: STD, BPH, TURP, and stuff like that. My fault. I can't go back. For some reason, this program, PowerPoint video, won't let you go back. And we've gotten this far, and this is the end of the line anyway. So I'm going to leave it. You can look at the abbreviations on PowerPoint in class, and you can see what they are. I can't even remember what they were at this point. But most of them we've already talked about. All the significant ones I've already talked about. So hopefully this sort of ties up all the male reproductive system, and you've had the female reproductive, so all the reproductive material is here. Everything I think you should know in regards to preparing yourself for the exam. And other than that,